There comes a point where it no longer matters how many books you've read, how many goals you've set, or how often you've promised yourself that change is coming. Because none of it means anything if you're still waking up tired, drifting through the day, and ending it with the same quiet frustration that's been following you for years. You keep telling yourself you're capable of more, but every time you try to change, something pulls you back. Maybe it's doubt, maybe it's a distraction, or maybe it's the comfortable weight of routine that no longer serves you. The truth is, you don't need a new strategy, a new month, or some perfect version of motivation to get started. You need one day to live with complete integrity. Not a day of perfection, but a day where you stop breaking silent promises to yourself, where every action, no matter how small, aligns with the kind of person you've always wanted to become. This is where the Stoic path begins, not in theory, not in talk, but in disciplined movement. It's not about changing everything overnight. It's about showing up with purpose, building momentum with structure, and learning to trust yourself again. Not through hype, but through proof. In this video, we'll walk that path together. Subscribe now, stay present, and by the end, you won't be hoping for change. You'll already be in motion. Let's begin. 1. One honest day can change everything. You don't need a perfect life to change. You need one day to live without excuses, without negotiation, without lying to yourself about who you are or what you truly intend to do. One day when your actions finally match your words. One day where you will stop outsourcing your discipline to motivation and start relying on something stronger, your word, your will, and your reason. That one day has the power to ignite a rhythm, restore clarity, and help you remember what it feels like to respect yourself again. Self-respect doesn't come from achievements, it comes from consistency. Not the kind you post about, but the kind you live in silence. The kind where you make a decision in the morning and follow through by night, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. That is the Stoic path. To act not for recognition, but for alignment. To live not for approval, but for principle. And in a world full of noise, that kind of life becomes rare, and that rarity becomes power. Most people don't fall because of a lack of knowledge. They fall because they betray themselves in small, quiet ways. They say they'll wake up early, but they hit snooze. They say they'll eat with discipline, but they reach for convenience. They promise themselves they'll focus, but drift back into distraction. It's not a weakness. It's not laziness. It's habit. Unquestioned, automatic, and unchecked. But the truth is, every time you break your word to yourself, something inside you begins to fracture. That fracture doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells you that your own voice doesn't matter. And once you believe that, you stop trusting your own potential. But if you reverse that just once, you begin to rebuild something sacred. Because one day of honesty with yourself reclaims that trust. Not in theory, but in practice. You wake up and actually get up. You say no to what weakens you, not because it's easy, but because you said you would. You sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. You choose stillness when your old habits beg for chaos. You bring presence to your morning, clarity to your choices, and weight to your promises. Nothing dramatic, nothing glamorous, just one solid, steady day where you live like someone who's done waiting. This matters because the Stoics don't aim for emotionless perfection. They aim for inner alignment. They understand that external chaos is irrelevant if your inner world is structured. That's why Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily of what he would face: rudeness, selfishness, betrayal. Not to feel bitter, but to remember that his peace was never dependent on others. It was forged from within, built on a code only he could live by. And that code began every morning with awareness, with choice, and with deliberate action. You don't change your life in a week. You change it in one day, repeated with resolve. You don't have to prove anything to the world, but you do owe something to yourself. And that debt is not paid by dreaming bigger or planning harder. It's paid by doing what you said you would do, starting now. That might mean walking instead of scrolling, cooking instead of ordering, breathing instead of reacting, and finishing instead of avoiding. These aren't grand gestures. They're small revolutions, quiet rebellions against your old self, proof that you are no longer available for your own excuses. This isn't discipline for the sake of suffering. It's not self-denial for the ego. It's a structure for freedom, because a man who owns his choices becomes untouchable. He doesn't need to scream to be heard. His presence speaks louder than his words. That kind of presence begins with one honest day, and that day becomes the seed of a stronger self. Not a version of you that pretends, but one that's finally aligned, finally clear, and finally in motion. You don't need a new identity. You need a clean start. A moment where you draw the line and say, this is where it turns. Not because the world changes, but because you decide to. Not because you have perfect control, but because you finally take full ownership of what you can control: your actions, your focus, and your follow-through. The man who keeps his word to himself, quietly, relentlessly, and without apology, will always rise, because he's no longer ruled by feelings, but led by values. And that's a kind of power no failure can erase. So before you plan the next 30 days, just give yourself one. One day of clarity, one day of presence, one day of complete integrity. That's where everything begins. Not someday, today. 2. Small wins build big change. Big changes rarely come from big actions. They come from a single choice, repeated until it becomes an identity. Not because it was easy, but because it was done anyway. That's what Stoic philosophy teaches us. Transformation is not a one-time performance. It's a quiet rhythm of right choices, stacked daily, built from the ground up. Small wins are not insignificant. They are the foundation. And when treated with the weight they deserve, they become the proof you need to finally believe in your own direction. We're trained by modern life to chase extremes. Hustle harder, change faster, cut everything out. But this mindset breaks more people than it builds. Because when life hits, when pressure builds, when willpower fades, extreme plans collapse. What remains, what holds you up when nothing else does, is the habit of doing small things well. One healthy meal, one workout, one decision to stay silent instead of reacting. These are the bricks that form the person you become. They may look minor, but they carry weight because they're made of intention, not impulse. When you feel lost, overwhelmed, or stuck, your mind will search for something big to break the pattern. But the Stoics never looked for drama, they looked for discipline. They understood that real power lies in the ordinary. Epictetus didn't speak about grand gestures. He spoke about daily conduct, about not being ruled by cravings, by anger, by distraction. Small victories against the self were more valuable than any external achievement, because those wins showed that you were not a slave to your emotions, but a master of your will. When you choose water over wine, when you walk instead of scroll, when you pause instead of attack, you're not just avoiding weakness, you're building resilience. And you won't see it instantly. You might even doubt if it matters. But over time, these decisions stack. They form a life, because habits are invisible until they're unbreakable. They shape how you move, think, respond, and most importantly, how you view yourself. A man who wins the small battles starts to see himself as someone who finishes what he starts. And that shift changes everything. This is where most people fail. Not in effort, but in expectation. They look for the spark, the rush, the applause. But Stoicism isn't built on sparks. It's built on structure. A structure you create when no one is looking, when there's no prize, when the only reward is knowing that you honored your own standard. This isn't glamorous. It's not supposed to be. It's quiet, steady, and personal. That's why it works, because it doesn't need to be seen, it only needs to be done. You don't control the pace of change, but you do control what you repeat. Repetition is the hidden engine behind all progress. You won't always be motivated, but you can always be intentional. You won't always feel strong, but you can always make the next right move. That's what small wins teach you. How to move forward when the storm hasn't passed yet. How to show up even when you don't feel ready. How to hold your ground even when no one claps. And that kind of consistency makes you unshakable. It's easy to talk about big goals, but it's hard to eat clean when you're tired. It's hard to stretch when your mind wants comfort. It's hard to breathe deeply when your temper rises. Yet these are the exact moments that matter most. Not because they change the world, but because they change your relationship with yourself. When you act with discipline instead of emotion, with clarity instead of reaction, you build momentum. And momentum is strength in motion. It makes the next right choice easier. It reminds your mind that you're in control, even if the world isn't. That's what the Stoics meant by mastery. Not perfect, not dominance, but internal sovereignty, the ability to direct your energy, not waste it, to hold yourself to a standard, even when no one is holding you, to do what is necessary, not when it's convenient, but when it's required. And small wins give you that strength. They anchor you. They keep you grounded when emotion threatens to unseat you. They sharpen your focus and pull you out of the fog. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, don't plan your next transformation. Just win the next moment. Just choose the next right thing. Drink water, walk outside, get quiet, follow through. Not for show, not for anyone else, just for you. Because you said you would. That alone is powerful. If one honest day can change your direction, then one small win can change your momentum. And if you keep collecting those wins, one by one without rush or pressure or noise, something incredible begins to form. Not a fantasy, but a future. One where your habits become a discipline, your actions become identity, and your life begins to feel like something you've built, not escaped. That's the path. Not dramatic, not loud, but unshakably real. One small win at a time, starting now. 3. Don't wait for a new year. Choose a new you today. Most people wait for permission to change. They wait for a cleaner schedule, a new week, a fresh month, and a new year. But the longer they wait, the heavier the gap between who they are and who they want to be. Waiting becomes a habit, and habit becomes identity. You tell yourself you'll start once the stress settles down, once you sleep better, once life gives you room, but it never does. Life rarely gets easier. And if you keep postponing change for the ideal conditions, you'll live your entire life on standby. The hard truth is this: you don't need a better time to begin. You need the courage to begin now. Stoic philosophy is built on this exact principle. The present moment is all you truly own. Tomorrow isn't promised. Yesterday cannot be undone. But today, this hour, this breath is within your command. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that death was not some distant possibility, but a daily reality, and that urgency should not create fear but clarity. He didn't say to wait for January. He said, wake up now. Choose now. Live now. Because power is not in the idea of change. Power is in the choice to begin before you feel ready. When you wait for the calendar to validate your effort, you've already surrendered your agency. Growth doesn't recognize dates. It recognizes decisions. The man who changes on a random Tuesday has more power than the man who plans for January and folds by February. The longer you wait, the more you strengthen the identity of delay. You become the person who almost begins, who nearly changes, who talks big but stays the same. And that creates a quiet suffering, one that doesn't explode but slowly erodes your belief in yourself. You say you want discipline, but you wait for motivation. You say you want clarity, but you keep filling your schedule with noise. You say you want peace, but you chase distractions to avoid discomfort. This isn't judgment. This is recognition. Everyone has done it. But the Stoic path isn't about guilt. It's about awareness and what you choose to do once you're aware. Today is not just a day. It's a decision. You can either keep building a life you regret or take one step toward a life you respect. Change doesn't need a dramatic start. It doesn't need fanfare or social media announcements. It doesn't need a New Year's resolution. It needs one man to decide that he's done living below his own standard, that he's no longer interested in waiting for life to cooperate, that his actions are no longer dependent on mood approval or timing. Who he becomes is shaped by what he chooses now, not by what he hopes will happen later. That kind of man is rare, but that kind of man is powerful. So how do you begin when everything in your head says wait? You act anyway. You don't wait for perfect energy, you move your body. You don't wait for clarity, you create it through quiet. You don't wait for motivation, you follow a structure. You wake up and you get serious about what matters. Not everything at once, just one thing, one action aligned with who you say you want to become. That's all it takes to cut through the fog. When you live with delay, you give away your momentum before it even begins. But when you act now, you set a standard. You show your mind that this is not a game, not a dream, not a someday fantasy, but a present reality. The first workout might feel weak, the first decision might feel small, the first hour of focus might be scattered. But none of that matters. What matters is that you showed up today. Not because the calendar said so, but because your inner standard did. That's what makes this mindset unshakable. Because it's not based on hype, it's based on internal law. And when you operate by internal law, external noise loses its grip. You stop chasing motivation like a child. You stop waiting for applause. You stop needing life to be convenient before you commit. You become the kind of person who honors the moment, not the month. And that shift in mindset rewires everything. So stop romanticizing change. Stop packaging it into some future version of yourself. Stop waiting for Monday, for January, for another chance to delay. The opportunity is already here. Time is already moving. The cost of waiting is not measured in days. It's measured in confidence, in identity, in momentum you never build because you never start. There is no right time. There is only right now. And if you keep waiting, you're not delaying change. You're choosing to stay the same. The Stoic doesn't wait for clarity to begin. He begins, and clarity follows. He doesn't wait for the crowd to agree. He walks alone if he must. He doesn't wait to feel like the man he wants to be. He acts like him now. And that decision to stop waiting and start becoming is what separates men who change their lives from men who only imagine it. So, choose your next action wisely, because the future you're waiting for won't appear later. It's hidden in what you choose to do today. 4. Motivation fades. Discipline builds motivation is loud in the morning and silent in the afternoon. It wakes you up full of fire, then disappears the moment reality pushes back. You've felt it, the rush of energy when a new idea hits, followed by the slow unraveling as the day wears on. You start strong. You write the list. You make the plan, and then slowly you negotiate with yourself. You push one task to later, then another. You tell yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow, and the cycle continues. Motivation can light a spark, but it cannot keep the fire burning through resistance, fatigue, through the everyday noise of life. This is where discipline steps in. Not with noise, but with structure. It's not emotional. It's not reactive. It doesn't rise and fall with how you feel. Discipline simply does the work. It shows up whether it feels good or not. It doesn't ask for your mood. It asks for your decision. That's why the Stoics built their lives around principle, not passion. They understood that emotions shift like the weather, but values stay anchored. Seneca didn't rely on motivation to write his letters. Marcus didn't depend on inspiration to rule an empire. They structured their lives around deliberate habits, quiet routines, and clear inner laws. Because discipline doesn't just build results, it builds identity. The modern world worships hype, it rewards urgency. It sells energy drinks and fast starts. But the Stoic knows that what begins fast often fades faster. What matters more is what endures. And endurance is only possible when you stop needing to feel ready before you act. If you build a life around motivation, you'll be strong some days and scattered most. But if you build around discipline, you'll be steady. Always. And steadiness is rare. That's what makes it powerful. When your body is tired, discipline makes you stretch anyway. When your mind is foggy, it helps you find one clear task. When your emotions are scattered, it brings you back to focus. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to stay on track. Discipline is a system of small anchors that hold you in place when the storm hits. And the more you return to those anchors, the stronger you become. Not by force, but by design. Because repetition creates reality. You become what you consistently do. And when what you do is tied to who you say you want to be, the gap between your potential and your identity begins to close. It starts with one habit. One moment in your day where you stop negotiating with yourself and just follow through. Not because you feel like it, but because you said you would. You said you'd train. So you move. You said you'd write. So you sit down. You said you'd eat clean. So you choose the option that aligns with your standard. No emotion, no drama, just follow through. These actions may seem small, but they rewire how your mind sees you. Each time you follow through, you tell your subconscious, I can trust myself. And that self-trust becomes the foundation for everything else. The Stoics didn't aim to suppress emotion. They aimed to rise above being ruled by it. They knew that feelings weren't reliable guides. A calm morning could turn chaotic by noon. A good mood could vanish with one comment. That's why they trained not for emotional highs, but for mental clarity. Not for motivation, but for mastery. The man who acts only when he feels like he is a slave to mood. But the man who acts because he's decided to, that man is free. Because his strength is no longer up for debate. It's not situational, it's who he is. You already know what needs to be done. You don't need more hype, you need more follow-through. Not in everything, just in the things that matter. When you treat your habits as sacred, your results take care of themselves. You begin to shift from reacting to creating, from waiting to initiating, from hoping to building. And when that shift happens, something deeper awakens. You stop chasing purpose and start becoming the kind of person who carries it. There will still be days where you feel off. There will still be moments when nothing seems to work. But discipline doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for consistency. When motivation disappears, discipline is what gets you out of bed. It's what keeps your body moving when your mind says stop. It's what pulls you back to your priorities when distraction tempts you away. That is the hidden strength of a Stoic. Not their passion, but their persistence. So the next time you feel like quitting, don't ask how you feel. Ask what you promised. Return to your anchor. Reconnect to your standard. Then act, not loudly, but clearly. Because discipline isn't about force, it's about freedom. The freedom to move with direction, even when nothing around you feels certain. The freedom to build a calm mind in a noisy world. The freedom to show up, not just today, but again tomorrow and again the next day, until your consistency becomes undeniable. When motivation fades, and it will, what remains is who you've trained yourself to be. Make sure that version of you knows how to move without noise, how to choose without hesitation, and how to stay grounded when everything else shakes. That's discipline, and that's how you build a life worth respecting. 5. Momentum is a muscle. Build it daily. Momentum doesn't arrive. It's not something you stumble upon or wait for. It's something you build, deliberately, slowly, and often in silence. It's not the product of one massive effort, but of small, consistent actions done with clarity and intention. And just like a muscle, if you don't train it, it weakens. If you don't feed it daily effort, it fades. Most people think momentum is about intensity, but in Stoic philosophy, it's about rhythm, a steady pace, a daily standard, a mindset trained to move forward even when you don't feel like it. The reason most people can't stay consistent is that they rely on energy instead of structure. They sprint on day 1, crash on day 3, and by day 5, they've already given up. But consistency doesn't need to feel exciting. It needs to feel real. The Stoics didn't chase momentum, they created it. Not with inspiration, but with repetition. They understood that nothing gains strength unless it's tested daily. That's how they trained not just their minds, but their character. They knew that motion, however small, is always stronger than perfection delayed. When you move your body today, even for 10 minutes, you're not just exercising. You're reinforcing identity. When you prepare your own meal, instead of reaching for convenience, you're reminding yourself that your choices carry weight. When you choose silence over distraction or pause instead of react, you're not being passive, you're being precise. And that precision, when repeated, becomes power. That's the core of momentum. Not speed, not hype, but control. People think they lose progress when they skip a workout or break a habit once. But the real damage isn't in the break, it's in how long they stay off track. The longer you wait to resume, the heavier the starting point becomes. That's why building daily motion matters. Even a small step forward keeps the chain intact. Even one right choice prevents collapse. You don't need perfect days, you need days that don't quit. Momentum, like the Stoic mind, is forged in discomfort. It's born in the early mornings, disciplined evenings, and calm persistence when life gets loud. You don't need a revolution. You need a rhythm, a repeated motion that becomes automatic, not because it's easy, but because you've made it non-negotiable. Stoicism doesn't teach you to chase the fire. It teaches you to become the furnace, to stop depending on external motivation and to start depending on inner alignment. When your actions are guided by values rather than emotion, you no longer need to feel ready to move. You just move. Think about how you start your day. The first hour is either momentum gained or momentum lost. That's why how you wake up matters. That's why hitting snooze isn't just about sleep, it's about surrender. Every small delay feeds a larger identity, and that identity either builds or erodes your future. You don't need to conquer the day. You need to show up for it fully. Not as a performer, as a craftsman. One task at a time, one win at a time. No shortcuts, no drama, just the quiet building of forward motion. When you show up daily, you stop needing to rebuild yourself from scratch every Monday. You no longer start over. You keep going. You become harder to knock off course because your movement is no longer fragile. It's reinforced through practice, through principle, through mental resilience. That's the power of building momentum like a muscle. It becomes part of your reflex, something you return to when things get tough. Something you rely on when the world throws chaos your way. In the Stoic mind, progress isn't a burst, it's a path. And the most dangerous thing is not falling behind, it's staying still. The stillness of the wrong kind breeds decay. But movement, even slow, sharpens the mind, clears the emotions, and strengthens your internal compass. You don't need to feel confident, you need to act with clarity. You don't need to feel ready, you need to stay in motion. That's how momentum wins, by not stopping, even when the terrain gets steep. So when the resistance hits, and it will, don't aim to overpower it. Aim to move anyway. A walk, a breath, a decision to say no when everything inside you screams yes. These aren't just habits, they're anchors. They're the invisible threads that hold your momentum together. And the more you train them, the more unshakable you become. Not because life is easier, but because you've become more equipped to face it. Momentum isn't magic. It's not built by chance. It's a craft, built daily, maintained quietly, strengthened through effort, and protected by discipline. And when you train it like a muscle, you stop waiting for the spark. You become the one who lights it. So the question isn't whether you'll stay motivated tomorrow. The question is, will you move today? Because that single decision is the one that keeps everything alive. 6. Your word to yourself is sacred. There's a kind of strength that doesn't show up in muscles or metals. It shows up in silence, when you do exactly what you said you would, even when no one's watching. That kind of strength is built through integrity, and integrity begins with one thing: honoring your word to yourself. Not the promises you make to others, not the image you present, but the private contract is between you and your own standard. That agreement, once broken too many times, is what erodes self-respect. Not failure, not setbacks, not criticism, but the quiet pattern of betraying yourself when it's inconvenient. The Stoics understood this. They didn't measure strength by public image, but by personal conduct. Epictetus said we should speak little, and only of what we must, because action is the real language of character. When you say, "I'll wake up at 6, and then you do," that's not routine, it's identity. When you say, "I won't touch my phone tonight," and hold that line, you're not resisting pleasure, you're reinforcing self-trust. And when you say, "I'll be better today," and then prove it in the small things, you're building a foundation stronger than any speech or resolution could ever deliver. The reason this matters is that your brain is always listening. Every time you set a goal and back out, every time you make a promise and break it, even when it seems small, your subconscious takes note. It starts to treat your word like noise, harmless, unimportant, easy to ignore. And eventually, so do you. You begin to doubt your own declarations, not because they were unrealistic, but because they became optional. That doubt spreads. It shows up in hesitation. It shows up in excuses. And worst of all, it shows up in your inability to believe in yourself, even when you're serious. But the inverse is also true. Keep a promise, even one, and your entire posture changes. You walk differently. You speak more clearly. You carry yourself with quiet confidence. Because now you're not just talking about change, you're backing it with action. The man who follows through isn't louder, but he's heavier. His presence has weight, not because of who he appears to be, but because of what he consistently proves in private. And the world responds to that weight, not with applause, but with trust. This is the real source of power, not external rewards, but internal certainty. A man who knows he can rely on his own decisions becomes untouchable. The chaos around him may rise, but his direction remains steady. He doesn't need approval to act. He doesn't need conditions to be perfect. Because he's already decided who he is, and his actions simply confirm it. That kind of discipline doesn't happen by accident. It's built, deliberately, one promise at a time. You don't need to overhaul your life to build that. You just need to stop breaking the small agreements. If you say you'll read tonight, read. If you say you'll show up on time, show up. If you say today's the day you begin again, begin. Begin. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just with presence, with clarity, with enough force to remind yourself, I still mean what I say. This principle is more than motivation. It's mental training. Every time you follow through, especially when it's hard, you send a message to your mind. I don't flinch under pressure. I don't bend to convenience. I don't abandon myself when things get uncomfortable. That's how you build resilience, not in theory, but in practice, through consistent, self-directed action, through holding the line, even when you're tired, even when no one would blame you for quitting. There will be moments when it feels like no one notices. And that's the point. When you stop performing for others, you finally start living for something real. The Stoics taught us that virtue is its own reward. That peace doesn't come from applause, it comes from alignment. When your actions match your values, the noise fades. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining your effort. You stop trying to prove anything to anyone. Because your word becomes your identity. An identity once built on truth cannot be shaken by circumstance. So if you've been feeling like you can't trust yourself lately, don't try to fix everything. Start with one thing. One clear, specific promise. Not grand, not loud, just real. Write it down, commit to it, and follow through. Because once your word means something to you again, everything else becomes possible. You don't need more time. You need more truth, more follow through, more structure, and less negotiation. Your word to yourself is sacred. Not symbolic, not casual, sacred. And when you treat it that way, your energy changes, your habits change, your outcomes change. Because now you're no longer building a version of yourself you hope to become. You're living as him, quietly, fully, without delay, without compromise. 7. The you that acts today shapes the you tomorrow. You don't become a new person overnight, and you don't wake up one day transformed without earning it. Who you'll be tomorrow is already being shaped by what you tolerate, what you choose, what you allow, and what you repeat today. Your habits aren't just things you do, they are seeds you plant. And whether you notice it or not, those seeds are always growing. That's why the most dangerous lie isn't I can't. It's I'll start later. Because every delay feeds an identity of hesitation. And every action, no matter how small, begins to sculpt your future in real time. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology did. They taught that the only true measure of a man is what he does daily, not occasionally, not when it's easy, not when he's inspired, but when no one's watching. Because every choice you make, every thought you repeat, every emotion you let run wild without question, it all compounds. And that compound effect is what creates your future self. Not the version you imagine, but the one you are actively rehearsing through your current behavior. If you spend today avoiding discomfort, you train tomorrow's version of yourself to flinch. If you spend today numbing stress with distraction, you train your future self to stay dependent on noise. If you let the difficult conversation slide, skip the workout again, or scroll instead of reflect, you're not just making today harder. You're teaching your future self to surrender sooner. And slowly, you become someone who gives in before you even try. Not because you're weak, but because you never challenged yourself to build the mental muscle of follow-through. That's why action matters more than intention. Not because intention is meaningless, but because without action, it remains trapped in theory. The man who intends to change but takes no step forward is standing still. And over time, even his own thoughts begin to lose power. He knows what he wants, but he doesn't move. He makes plans but doesn't execute them. He dreams but never disciplines. And slowly, doubt becomes his default. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can reclaim the wheel. You can shift momentum, and it doesn't require a perfect routine or a dramatic overhaul. It only requires ownership of today. If you speak less and act more. If you choose clarity over convenience. If you treat the small decision, the quiet yes to the hard thing, as the only thing that matters, something shifts. Because now your future is no longer abstract. It's being lived, built, and shaped in the now. Think about the person you admire most. Not the loudest, not the most charismatic, but the most grounded. What you admire isn't just their results, it's their presence, their steadiness, their sense of purpose. That wasn't born from one perfect day. It was forged in repetition, on difficult mornings, in quiet sacrifices, in the decision to rise when comfort told them to stay still. You already know what you need to do. What matters now is whether you're willing to do it when no one claps, when no one sees, and when nothing feels urgent, but your soul is still calling for growth. There's no shortcut to becoming your future self. There's only action. And that action begins with the version of you standing in front of the next decision. The one who either reaches for the old excuse or raises the new standard. The one who either stays in the loop or breaks it. Not with force, but with choice. Because every disciplined action is a message, not to the world, to yourself. It says, I am no longer delaying who I am meant to be. That kind of living builds a self-image that cannot be shaken. Because now, you don't need to remind yourself of your goals. You see them in how you move. You see them in how you eat, how you speak, how you show up. There's nothing to fake, nothing to prove. You've built proof into your days. And with that proof, you walk differently. Not with arrogance, but with alignment. Not with bravado, but with quiet certainty. When you wake up tomorrow, the only thing that will matter is whether you honored what you said you would do today. Not what you hoped to feel, not what you planned in your head, but what do you actually follow through on? That's where self-respect is built, not in outcomes, in alignment. And the man who acts in alignment doesn't have to chase confidence. He creates it, not with noise, with evidence. So stop imagining the better version of yourself and start acting like him. Speak how he would speak. Move how he would move. Focus on how he would focus. That's not pretending, that's becoming. Because transformation isn't magic, it's motion. And the version of you you're becoming tomorrow, he's already watching the choices you're making today. Make them count. 8. You don't need a life makeover, just one powerful day. You're not broken, you're just scattered. Not lost, just overloaded with noise. When life feels heavy, it's tempting to think the solution is a full reset. You need a radical overhaul, a total life makeover, and some perfect new system that wipes the slate clean and fixes everything in one sweep. But that's not how change works. The Stoics knew this better than anyone. They didn't teach massive transformation. They taught mastery of the present. Because the truth is, your life doesn't need to be rebuilt from the ground up. It just needs one powerful day lived with absolute integrity. One day where you stop negotiating with yourself. One day where you follow through, not with perfection, but with presence. One day when the actions you take finally match the values you speak about. That's what shifts you. Not fantasy, not waiting for the perfect morning, the perfect schedule, or the perfect version of you to appear. Just one day done well, fully, deliberately, and with enough honesty that it sets a new internal standard. That's all it takes to ignite momentum. When you're overwhelmed, your mind starts playing tricks on you. It tells you that unless you fix everything, nothing will change. Unless you have the perfect plan, it's not worth starting. But the Stoic approach flips that. You don't need to do everything, you just need to do something. And not just anything, but something meaningful. Something that forces you to confront yourself and reestablish control. Something that reminds your mind, I'm not at the mercy of chaos. I choose how I respond. What does that look like in practice? It looks like saying no to the urge to scroll and yes to the journal you've been avoiding. It looks like cooking one real meal instead of another convenience fix. It looks like finishing one task completely instead of half doing 5. It's not impressive on paper. No one claps, no one notices. But your nervous system does. Your subconscious does. Because you just interrupted the loop. You stopped reacting and started directing. That's how power returns. Not through intensity, but through clarity. And that clarity can only be found in action. Not overthinking, not replaying what you should have done differently, but moving forward with what you have, where you are, as you are. One powerful day where the goal isn't to do everything, it's to do one thing right. And then anchor to that. That's why this approach works. It's grounded in reality, not idealism. Stoicism never promised ease, it promised inner stability. When the world shakes, the Stoic doesn't collapse. He doesn't pretend the storm isn't real. He just remembers that his response is still his to command. And that's exactly what one powerful day trains in you. The reminder that the way forward isn't through escape, it's through alignment. You stop seeking the motivation to change your life and start seeking the opportunity to master one moment. And once you see how strong you can be in just one day, the excuses lose their power. You're no longer chasing confidence, you're building it. Because now you have proof. Proof is the strongest form of belief. No affirmation can replace the feeling of showing up fully for yourself when it would have been easier to bail. It doesn't matter if you failed before. It doesn't matter how long you've been stuck. The timeline resets every morning. The Stoics didn't dwell on yesterday's slip. They focused on today's opportunity. Epictetus didn't preach perfection. He preached progress. Daily, deliberate, focused movement. And sometimes that begins not with a major shift, but with a single vow. Today, I act like the man I say I want to become. This isn't about forcing discipline through shame. It's about choosing clarity over chaos. And clarity isn't loud. It doesn't come in a rush. It comes in the quiet moments when you shut the door, turn off the noise, and decide, I'm going to live today in alignment, even if it's just for me, even if no one sees, even if no one understands what I'm doing differently. Because I understand. Because I've lived long enough out of sync with myself to know the cost. So stop waiting for the perfect season. Stop waiting to feel ready. Stop building towers in your head and start placing one solid brick in reality. One workout, one deep breath, one moment of restraint, one hard truth is spoken with kindness. That's the weight you carry into tomorrow. That's the version of you who wakes up a little clearer, a little steadier, a little closer to the man you've been trying to find. You don't need a grand entrance into a new life. You need one honest day, one day that proved to yourself, I still have it in me. Not to be everything, but to be consistent. Not to win the world, but to win my own respect back. Because when momentum begins to build, not by accident, but by design. And that momentum, grounded in integrity and shaped by effort, is how real transformation begins. Not later, not eventually, today. Real change doesn't come from waiting for the right moment. It comes from honoring the moment you're in. Everything we've walked through, discipline, momentum, integrity, small wins, clear actions, and unshakable self-trust, is not theory. It's a way of living, a way of thinking, a way of choosing. And it always begins today. The Stoic path teaches us that power lies in presence. You don't need to change everything to change your life. You just need one honest day, repeated with consistency, shaped by discipline, and rooted in values you choose to honor. You are not too far gone. You are not behind. What matters is whether you'll rise with purpose, even when no one sees it. Whether you'll keep your word, even when the world tempts you to forget it. That is where your strength grows. That is how you rewire not just your habits, but your identity. So don't rush. Don't wait for perfection. Just start. Wake up and treat your thoughts with intention. Treat your actions with respect. Use the next decision in front of you to move one step closer to the version of yourself you admire. Not someday, but now. Let this be your invitation to return to what matters, to reclaim your self-discipline, to use each moment as training for resilience, clarity, and peace. If this message resonates with you, share your story in the comments below. Let others know they're not alone. You're not the only one rebuilding, realigning, and rising, because this isn't about one perfect day. It's about who you become when you live that day, again and again, on purpose. One day, one choice. That's how a new life begins.